I assume you can all hear me. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar of this morning on basic costing for the garment industry. In case you don't know me, my name is Matthias Knappe. I'm working at the International Trade Center here in Geneva, and I'm responsible for our projects in fiber, textiles, and clothing. And we have been organizing this webinar as part of our global textiles and clothing program that operates presently in 7 countries, but it is open to other countries that are interested, or other people that are interested as well, so that we don't make a difference between our beneficiary countries in this regard and others, even though we do translation into languages that concern our beneficiary countries. A quick note on ITC. If you don't know ITC, if you're new, if you haven't joined us before, ITC stands for the International Trade Center. It is a joint organization of the World Trade Organization and the UN. Our mandate is trade promotion and export development for developing countries, and specifically for the business community and small and medium-sized enterprises who we support in internationalization. And we do this in many sectors of importance to developing countries. And of course, one sector that is very important in many countries, in many developing countries, in many least developed countries, it's textiles and clothing. This is the third and last seminar in a series of webinars on garment costing, or if you will, on full garment costing, after our first 2 webinars, which we had on full garment costing on 30th of November last year. If you remember, if you were with us at that time, we had a first one on job costing and end-to-end cost sheet development. And we also looked towards the future of full cost value analysis. Today, we are going back to basics. We're looking really on the basics of garment costing in the industry, because we also felt that not everywhere we have a good basis of the complexity, to understand the complexity of costing in the garment industry. It's the third part, in this part today, so we are really looking into how to cost fabrics, how to cost trims or accessories like buttons, zippers, interlinings, or what have you, and the particularities behind it. We also look into labor, overheads, and then we finish where the second part starts, or which we already had, on job costing. In fact, this third webinar should maybe have been the first one, if we look at it from the perspective of complexity, because we now look into the we call this basics, but it's not really basic. It can be very complicated, but we look into how to start garment costing. In November, we felt it would be better to start with more complex things first, and then come back to the basics at a later stage, because also we're targeting a little different audience at that time. All these 3 parts, so today, and that's what we discussed earlier in November, are parts of a new guide, a new book that ITC and its Global Textiles and Clothing Program will be bringing out, and it will be making available to enterprises, associations, and training institutes. It is planned to be ready in spring, even though, at least in Geneva, we already have spring weather. It will initially be in English, but then we will also translate it into other languages that we are working in. So probably likely these languages for which a translation has been provided today. And then we will also, through our technical assistance, provide support to companies in the training and in applying the knowledge. some housekeeping announcement before I hand over to our presenter is that the presentation will be recorded and it will be made available on our website in a few days or in a week or so. Also, the slide deck will be made available. In order to benefit best from the presentation, I think it would be the best if you had the latest Zoom version on your computer. Then you can also benefit from the interpretation that we provide. You have the little icon with the world, the globe. If you click there, you can choose between the original language, which will be English, but then the translation into Arabic, French, and Russian. We would like to have a very in-depth discussion with you. So whenever you have a question, a comment, or some doubts, please do raise your hand or pose a question. And if you pose a question, please do this in the Q&A facility, the question and answer facility. Please do not use the chat because we are not looking at the chat regularly. The chat is really to be chatting between yourselves and for some administrative stuff with ITC if you wish. But if you have technical questions or would like to make a comment on the presentation, please use the question and answer button. You can also raise your virtual hand and then we will give you the floor and you can ask the question directly. Well, now let me quickly introduce our main contributor and author of this guide and who will also do the presentation today and who did the presentations in November, David Birnbaum. David is a renowned garment industry specialist who has really worked all his life in the garment industry. He worked in factories, he managed factories, and then he also built some factories. And he also has been advising brands and retailers, suppliers, factories, and also some governments on solving garment industry related problems and help them to develop strategies to overcome these problems. So it's really a good, a good resource for us to look into these subjects and possibly other subjects. So thank you, David, for having worked with us. Thank you for being with us today. And I think I just hand over to you now and leave the floor to you to introduce us to basic garment costing. David.
Thank you, Matthias. It really is a pleasure to be here. I think you brought up a very important point. Basic costing is a fundamental requirement. It is the basis on which all costing information is developed. All too often, I experience senior people in the industry lack this knowledge and discipline. So I'm very happy to be given the opportunity to discuss this at some depth with you. It is actually a somewhat complex subject. And please, I would ask you to follow Matthias's suggestion that if you have questions, please ask the questions. I don't want people to lose the focus of what this is about. Let me put this up on the screen, see if I can get this. And
we'll see the screen.
You see the screen? I just want to, very good. All right, does everybody, can you see this? Okay, let me begin at the beginning. We're looking at three types of cost analysis: a costing, a cost sheet, and a job costing. The costing, as I said here, is the total of all materials, all processes that take place within this for a particular style. It includes more than hundreds, it includes thousands of specific items. For this reason, I've never really seen a costing. I certainly have never tried to replicate it. Let me give you an example. Take the simplest cost item in the entire supply chain, a zipper. In most cases today, the customer will designate the zipper supplier, say YKK. And we know the cost of the zipper supposedly because the zipper YKK costs 10 cents. And that's what we put down in our trim sheet under the cost of zippers. Now it starts getting interesting. There are other expenses, small expenses, but nevertheless they exist. The factory has to take the colors of the fabric and translate them into the colors on the YKK color color card. Okay. That takes time and it costs some money. Somebody has to make up the purchase order. That costs a little bit of money. YKK, the local YKK office, will ship the zipper in 3 days, approximately, and then somebody has to receive the zippers and inspect the zipper to make sure it's the right color, the right size, and then send it upstairs to the merchandiser, who will in turn check the zipper for the color, the size, and possibly send the zipper over to the buying office. The customer's buying office will go through the same process. In some cases, the buying office will take all of the trim items for that particular style, stick them on a trim sheet, and send them to the customer, to the customer's home country. All of this costs money. Not a lot of money, certainly no more than 1/2 cent. But when you think about it, 1/2 cent might be 1% of the factory's profit. That is the simple part. The real question is, what happens when things go wrong? The factory can't order the zipper until they have an order. That's obvious. But in order to have the order, they had to negotiate a price and a delivery date. And so when they have received the physical order, the clock is ticking. Imagine you have a factory in Dominican Republic, 200 machines, and you send the order to the local YKK office. 3 days later, they come back and they say, we're really sorry, we don't have blue 909. But don't worry, we are going to check with the main Caribbean YKK office. They have a much bigger warehouse. That's fine. 3 days. 3 days after, they come back and say, well, I'm sorry, the YKK Caribbean office doesn't have the 909 zipper either, but we're going to go to the Western Hemisphere office factory of YKK in Puebla, Mexico. And they don't have it. Now you're in trouble. The clock is ticking. You're running 10 days. And in order to go forward in your own factory, you have to start changing your schedule around. Because there's no sense cutting the fabric and start the sewing until you have the trim, including the zippers. Anything that's happening now when the zipper finally arrives is going to lead to overtime. With the result that your costs go up. The terrible thing happens when Puebla comes back and says, you know something, we don't have the zipper, but we could dye the zipper in 21 days. Now you're talking about a 30-day delay. This is serious and very costly. Your factory manager goes back to the buying office in Hong Kong and tells them the problem. This is a disaster. There are 4 colors in the order. What are they going to do? They're going to ship 3 colors. They're going to ship 3 colors and then 1 color 30 days later? They can't do that. What are they going to do? Cancel the 4th color? The fabric has been purchased. The only thing they can do, the only thing you can do in the factory is go into an emergency schedule. Stop everything. We're going to produce this goods working day and night. And maybe you could get it out in 10 days. Do you know what the costs are? The zipper is 10 cents, but the cost of that zipper can be dollars. This is what the costing is about. The cost sheet is a simple diagram, maybe seven or eight cost factors. It is an estimate of costs. Because remember, you did the cost sheet at the beginning of the process. On day one, when the customer came to you and held up the garbage and says, "Can you make this?" That is when you did your cost sheet. That isn't the real cost. You won't know the real cost until you have actually produced the garbage and shipped the goods. And that is the job cost. The job costing will tell you the actual cost of producing the order. And divided that by the quantity, you will actually know the per unit cost. It is of tremendous value, but you can't do anything until goods have been shipped. Matthias?
I think we have one hand raised, no? Jaina Mariana?
No, not now. We can continue. Oh, there's one hand. Just a second.
So there's one question. Can we give the floor?
Well, person just lower. Wait. Well, so Mohammed, you can talk. Yes. Go ahead. Hello?
Mahmoud Sayed, you raised the hand. You have the chance now to ask the question.
Yes. Well, I will lower his hand.
Okay, he disappeared. So go ahead, David.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. This is a basic cost sheet. It has the fabric, it has the trim, it has what we call CM, which is a traditional term meaning cut and make. It consists of direct labor, overhead, and usually the profit. The numbers are arbitrary. I wanted a simple cost sheet to add up to $10. The percentage of FOB are quite reasonable. 60% for fabric, 10% for trim, that's reasonable. 30% for CM is also reasonable. We're going to be using this as the basis of a cost sheet going forward. What is the value of this cost sheet? Anybody who's run a factory will tell you the customer doesn't give a damn about your costs. They're interested in the price, and price is based on value. Is your price worth the money? What are you offering them that's worth the money? Are you offering them better quality, faster delivery? Are you offering them special services? That's where it is. But your costs, they don't care whether the price they've settled on is greater than your costs or lower than your costs. Externally, it has very little value. Internally, it offers an opportunity. It offers an opportunity for the factory to management to make some decisions. What is interesting about the value of the cost sheet is that the data that you have already exists in the factory. You don't have to search for it, you just have to put it in order. Okay, we're going to start looking at the basic cost factor. The first and most important is the fabric. How do you determine the fabric? Well, it's the consumption in meters times the price per meter. A 2-meter garment with a cost of $3 per meter is $6. It's not quite that easy. We're going to use as an example a very simple garment, a pair of pants. You look at your own pair of pants, and you see it consists of 4 legs, because each leg has two patterns, a back and a front. Waistband are small pieces, pockets, belt loops, zippers, zipper plackets, okay? So that they have, this is the pattern. So you can see in the single size marker below, imagine this is about 1.4 meters. Once you have the pattern, then somebody has to grade the pattern to put it into different sizes. So that, for example, if you have a measurement of the pant leg, it's 1/4 inch on each pattern, on each size, because you have 4 sizes, and therefore you have a 1-inch difference. Okay? You take the pattern pieces, you lay them on a cutting table, and you have to minimize the consumption. This is a simple marker, one size. But those of you who don't have experience in the factory, let me say that the pattern has some special things about it. You notice that there's a line, sort of an arrow, on every pattern piece. That is because every pattern piece has to be laid out in one of two ways. Either it follows the grain of the fabric exactly, or is at a 45-degree angle. If it doesn't, if the pattern is off center, if it doesn't follow 45 degrees, the garment will never work. Matthias, are you with me? You have a question?
No, I'm with you, but there's another hand raised. I don't know whether it works now. Mustafa, Kamal, you have a question?
Go ahead, Mustafa. Your microphone is open. Mustafa.
Doesn't seem to be the case either, but we have Yasmin. Maybe Yasmin then.
Yasmin, you can talk, but your microphone is closed. You need to unmute yourself. Yasmin, you need to unmute yourself. But it's not working. Please send your questions in the Q&A button, please.
Sorry, David, please go ahead.
The actual one size marker that you have here is unusual in a factory. Although there is in the new type factory, which we call micro factory, there is what is called on-demand cutting, where you want to cut goods one piece at a time. This is the only time really that a one size marker works. This is what a regular marker looks like. The different colors represent different sizes. We've lumped sizes together, okay? And we've made a marker of anywhere between 4 and 12 pieces. If you go to a cutting department, you'll see that the size of the table is generally about 15 meters, as much as 30 meters for particular items such as men's suits, and about 2 meters wide. This is the reasonable marker. Now, the question is, the basic question is this width of the fabric. This marker will say is for 150 cm, about 58 to 60 inches, which is standard width. Okay? What happens if you can't get the 150 cm, but you have to get 120 cm? Well, you'll notice that at 150 cm, you had fairly close to four leg pieces in a width. Here, you're lucky to have 3. The fabric at 120 cm costs less than the fabric at 150 cm. The question is whether the cost difference can be made up in terms of the price. So that, for example, the example we have here, we're talking about 120 cm is 1.8 meters. 150 cm is 1.4 meters. In the previous markers, you will notice that they all went in one direction. No, they didn't. I'm sorry, they didn't. They went in one direction, with the waist on the right and the bottom of the leg on the left. In some cases, you need a marker that goes in one direction because there are some fabrics that only move in one direction. It might be the fact that there is a print, or it's a plaid that only moves in one direction. It could be the nature of the fabric, so that, for example, velveteen or corduroy has to be done in one direction, or else it'll be shaded. You can have a marker where you're going in 2 directions, such as you have here. Besides this, there are a wide range of other markers. There's what is called a step marker. A step marker is done with very expensive clothing. We take an example. You have a size assortment where you have 100 pieces of small, 200 pieces of medium, and 50 pieces of large. On a step marker, you will lay out 50 layers of fabric for all 3 sizes. Okay? And then you will lay out another 50 for just small and medium, and then finally 100 just for the medium. There are multi-style markers. For example, it happens if you're doing a man's suit. You'll naturally want to put the jacket and the pants together in a single marker. Or if it was women, a jacket and a skirt. They save remarkable savings. The thing about a marker is that small differences can have extremely large differences in the actual consumption. If you can save a half cm on one side of a pant leg, you take it out of the seam allowance at the widest section, like the hips. There are 2 seams on each pattern piece. There are 4 pattern pieces, and therefore there are 8 differences. Each of a half cm, you're talking about a 4 cm difference. This might allow you, instead of to have 3 pant legs, to have 4 pant legs. The remarkable thing. We call this skimping. Nobody notices because the seam itself has to be finished somehow. It's a welt seam, which means it's turned back, or it's an overlock seam, so that you never see the missing amount. But the saving is tremendous. Okay, on top of this.
David, can I interrupt you there, because we have a question that fits here, I think. It's from Sofiane in French. I'll try to see whether I can translate this a little bit. Okay. Is the price calculation based on a standard size, or a size breakdown, or a history of patterns, markers you did in the past?
No, this is very important. We're looking at methodology, and there's no question that if you get a size assortment of 50 small, 50 mediums, and 200 large, the actual consumption changes. And usually, smart factories know in advance where they are with this. There could be considerable difference on this. Please, this is an important question. Anybody who has questions like this, we want to go ahead and do this. We want to go ahead and give an answer. We want to look at damages. Okay, you have fabric, you're laying out the fabric on the table, and at a certain point you see a damage. Okay? You have to cut away the damage. But you have to do more than cut away the damage. You go back to a marker, and you see that the pieces are interlocked. The pieces are locked together. If you hit a place on the leg of the pattern piece, you have to have an overlap. You have to have a new piece of fabric that starts at the beginning of the pattern piece. And so that the difference of a small damage of a half cm will require something on the order of a half a meter overlap, because you have to have all of the pattern pieces complete.
David, I think Sofiane also raised his hand and would like to follow up on the question. Can we give the floor, Mariana?
Yes, Sofiane, you can unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I will speak in English. So my question is when we calculate the costing, we don't know the number of piece orders.
We don't know the number of
à produire.
Do you have a solution for that? We have to make approximative piece, because the
I'm sorry, we don't know the number of what?
you know the pièces commandées.
Ouais.
The number of damages, or no?
Posez la question en français et on va essayer de traduire.
Ok. Ma question est, lorsqu'on va calculer le prix d'un modèle, d'une pièce, on ne connaît pas d'avance la quantité à commander. Donc, c'est un projet.
Ah.
Donc, sur quelle base on va faire les tracés? Est-ce qu'on va faire les tracés sur une estimation de quantité de pièces? Est-ce qu'on va faire le tracé sur la taille moyenne, ou on fait le pièce sur une historique d'autres clients? Ça, c'est une question très importante parce qu'elle varie d'une taille à une autre. Donc, par exemple, la taille small, c'est pas comme la taille X large.
So, I tried to translate, but I'm under the control of Delphine. Maybe you can also come in if I did something wrong there. But I think he's saying that when they receive an order, they do not exactly know the number of pieces the order contains. So he has to make an assumption of how many pieces to cut, and this assumption will be based on what?
This is a major problem. It goes well beyond cutting. There are many parts of the process which are fixed. For example, product development is fixed. It costs a certain amount of money for each style. Whether you get an order for 10 pieces or 1 million pieces, the full cost of product development remains the same. Now, if you get an order for 1,000 pieces and an order for 100,000 pieces, well, the cost per unit for 1,000 pieces is 100 times more than it would be for 100,000 pieces. The factories have to know this. They have to know their customer. And one of the things that people do is they keep records of this. You know, and you understand that if you're working for a Tesco or you're working for a Walmart, you're a factory doing mass production. The cost of product development is trivial; it's less than a penny. But if you're working for a designer label, it is very large. You have to know the customer, and if the customer has acted not intentionally, but even unintentionally unreasonable, where suddenly the customer realizes that only large-sized women want this garment, their customer should come back to you. There should be a renegotiation if the parties want to work together again. One of the problems we have in our industry is that the rules of our industry are not fixed. It has to do with the relationship between you and the customer. And this is paramount. If you want a successful factory, you need customers who think you are an important supplier. Anyway, getting back to the damages.
But sorry, David, Sofiane, vous voulez, c'est ça bien ou vous voulez poser une autre question? Well, he's not responding, so please go ahead, David.
Okay. There are limits to damages. When goods come into the factory has to inspect the goods. They have to inspect a certain percentage of the goods. They have inspection machines. If the number of damages exceed usually 10 damages on a 50-meter piece, then the piece is a reject. And normally in a factory, if this happens, you'll start inspecting greater percentage. At a certain point, you're going to return either you're going to return the goods or you're going to ask for a substantial discount. Traditionally, expensive wool millers mark the damage. You'll see a white thread at the selvage, and you will see on the hang tag that comes with the piece, they'll tell you 52.48. This is the 52 is the gross, the 48 is after damages. People of my generation rely on inspection on the cutting table because it's good. Let's face it, there's tremendous light, you can see everything. It's risky. And I point to one of the rules in our industry. The minute you cut the fabric, you own the fabric, whatever the problem. Wastage and shrinkage. At a certain point, you're left with a half meter of fabric, which you can't use. The piece is used up, there's a half meter left over, 0.75. That is part of your costs. The larger the pattern pieces, the higher the wastage. A dress has a much higher wastage percentage than a pair of pants, which has a much higher percentage wastage than a shirt or a pair of shorts. People in the business understand this and they know when they calculate it. You have shrinkage. Okay, shrinkage, all fabric shrinks. Even the fabric that's been centered is a machine that cuts out shrinkage. There is always a small percentage. It is usually accounted for in the pattern. Shading. This can be an interesting problem. The fabric itself, the color in the fabric will change slightly from one end to the other, particularly in natural fibers such as wool and cotton. Shrinkage in the length is accepted, and the important thing is to ensure that your marker does not have one part at one end and then the other part 5 meters down the line. Shrinkage in the wastage in the width from selvage to selvage is a damage and is automatically rejected. So we have an idea of consumption. Now we have to figure out the price per meter. You think of it, it's simple. You go to the mill, you order the fabric, they deliver the fabric, and you pay for the fabric. And by the way, this is very often the case. There are, this is more than 50, 60% of the time, this is what happens. But when we start looking at the different areas of ordering fabric, the rules are different. In many instances today, the customer, that's the brand or the retailer, your customer designates the mill and the price of the fabric. So we call this garment sourcing. price is fixed. If there are additional charges, such as local transportation, import tax, these are all recoverable from the customer because he designated the mill and he gave you the price of the fabric. If you're buying the fabric locally and it's dyed and finished locally, the only cost should be local transportation, and in many cases, the mill will pay for local transportation. Finally, there's a possibility that you'll be buying fabric in another country. The people who do this are either working in very specialized areas, which we'll go on in a few seconds, or they're major factory groups that are buying bulk fabric for branch factories all over the world. That's accounted for by them. The branch factory doesn't have a problem. If you are buying specialized fabric, we'll be talking about this later. If, for example, you are buying worsted wool, you have to go to a recognized factory. The procedures, the processes involved in production of worsted fabric are so great that the factory has got to handle the whole job, and you pay for the fabric, and you pay for it. And chances are, unless you're located in China, Korea, or in Europe, you are not going to find a worsted mill in your country. It's that's the nature of your product, and you have to consider that.
David, can I try to interrupt you there? There are two hands raised.
Yes, please.
Let's see, Sami Eliti.
Yeah, just 1 second. Matthias and David, please change your channel in the interpretation button to English. So in case they ask a question in another language, interpreters will translate into English. Okay, so I will open. Sami, you can speak, just unmute yourself, please. Sami, go ahead. Sami, you just need to unmute yourself.
Okay, then we go to Samia, maybe?
Yes.
Ebtalawi.
Samia, go ahead. You just need go. Yes.
Bonjour.
Hi,
We
we
hear
can
you.
hear you. Samia, your question? You are on mute. You need to unmute yourself and we can hear you.
Bonjour. Allô?
Oui, bonjour, on vous entend.
S'il vous plaît, vous parlez que le prix de matière. Logiquement, sur le coût, on a les prix des matières et les prix de fabrication. Le montage, le conditionnement et... Allô?
Ah, okay. Well,
Pour les matières,
Samia, si vous pouvez, s'il vous plaît, envoyer votre question dans les boutons Q&A.
Approchez-vous au microphone pour que nous puissions l'écouter.
vous m'écoutez maintenant? Allô? Allô?
Well, it's not working. Sorry, Samia. So we have 3 questions in the Q&A, button, Matthias.
Yeah, but these are not really questions. These are just where can we get a copy?
Well.
Allô?
Si, essayez de parler fortement. Sinon, on n'entend pas.
Et maintenant?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Vous m'entendez?
Oui, oui, Samia. On vous entend, s'il vous plaît, si vous pouvez poser vos questions.
Et ma question, le coût. Pourquoi vous parlez que sur le prix de matière? Normalement, le coût, on a le prix de matière, le prix de fabrication et de conditionnement. Parce que vous parlez sur la consommation des matières. Déjà, il y a des logiciels. Elle fait le calcul de matière selon les tailles et selon les commandes automatiques.
I suggest we continue and we ask her to pose a question in the Q&A.
Let me say this, if I understand correctly. Today, most, well, I should say many factories have computerized marker making. There are advantages and disadvantages. One thing that is clear about computerized marker making is that it will not only tell you the consumption of the fabric, but the percentage of consumption. So, yes, and so this is something that's acceptable. The greatest, because the cost of fabric is the single greatest cost of FOB. This is really where you want to save money. There is an old garment expression which says that the profit of the factory is on the floor of the cutting department. Meaning the wastage is where you lose the money. Having said that, computerized marker making is worthwhile if you have skilled people. Anyway, let me continue for a second.
David, there's one more question in the chat. It's Sophia, and again, it's a little bit in the French again, and it's a continuation of what he was asking earlier, a little bit. The host muted me, so now I can try to look at the question. So he says again, generally we must communicate a price offer or calculation before receiving the order. So it's the offering to the calculation of what you offer the brand or retailer. The question is how to estimate the consumption of fabrics and the efficiency of the markers if he doesn't really know the quantities by size. I'm not sure how this translates correctly there.
It's a sensible question. The answer is obvious. You cannot. The best you can do is look back on the history of a customer, which is, by the way, what people are beginning to do. You have computerized records of this, and they will tell you what their average assortment was. Or you could tell them that for this price is based on 242. Too small, 4 medium, too large. You can do that in size. You can do that in sizes, and that's what you base your price on. you can't just take a guess and expect to be right.
Okay, can I just compliment what you're saying, David? Because I think that is later on also the link between the costing and the costing sheet and the job costing.
Yes.
Because what she's referring, or he's referring to is, okay, we need to make a costing in order to give the price to our customer. But this is based on assumptions. And later on, we need to then, once the order has been done, we have to calculate, okay, what has now been the real cost? Because the cost is different from what we offered, because of damage, because of the sizes, because of other things. So, and then you can probably develop a kind of a relationship between, okay, I'm used to give this kind of costing price to my client, but in reality, the difference in the costing has been by X% higher or by X% lower. And that way you can maybe develop a more accurate costing for the future.
This is, in many cases, the relationship between the factory and the customer is adversarial. It's a zero-sum game where the customer wants to get the lowest price and the factory wants to get the highest price. Generally speaking, this is slowly disappearing because there has benefit for both sides. I want to go back to one point that one of your people asked, and that's about the computerized marker making. Computerized marker making is a really important asset. However, we tend to rely on the computer for computerized pattern making, computerized grading. And there's a risk here. I would suggest for the women in the audience, if you have an interest in vintage clothing, pre-loved clothing, ask yourself, why is the fit better for clothing that was made in the 1980s and 90s than today? And the answer is that actually pattern making, to some degree, grading is a craft skill. It doesn't translate 100% onto a computer. Marker making, yes, but not not the pattern making and all the grading. Okay, I want to continue.
Let me just
Okay,
got another question of Samia, but I will answer it because Samia, who spoke earlier, and we couldn't really understand her, is asking why we are looking so much into fabrics, because there are other aspects of costs, accessories, labor costs, overheads. Samia, this is part of it. We are just starting with the webinar. We're starting with fabrics, and but then we look into trims or accessories later on. We look into labor, and also we look into overheads. So this is all part of what we want to discuss with you this morning. Hope you're being reassured.
Having said this, when you buy Mateus's book, then you get into real costing issues. We get into the problems of soft costings. What is the cost of better quality? What is the cost of sustainability? This is the first part of a very complex subject. Let me go further. Okay, we're still with material costs.
No.
Okay. The process of material costs are based on other factors. The nature of the fiber, the nature of the fabric, the nature of the textile industry, where the factory is located, where the customer is located. There are some fibers, such as cashmere, such as silk, that have to be traded separately. The fact that you're the cashmere, the fact that you are in the fine wool business puts you in a different category, and the selection of factories are based on that. The nature of the fabric. As I said before, if you're in the men's suiting business and you want to produce, of course, worsted men's suits, that forces you into limited factories, and in many cases you cannot buy it locally. That's the order of things. The nature of the textile industry. We're going to be discussing this next. The textile industry plays an important positive or negative role in the garment and in the costing. Where the factory is located, where the customer is located. We have free trade agreements. If there is a free trade agreement, the factory that is located in the free trade zone has a benefit, provided the fabric comes from that free trade zone. So if the customer's in the free trade zone, the factory's in the free trade zone, they have an advantage. All of these are important factors that have to be taken into consideration. Oops. Okay. We're talking about the nature of the industry. This is not an exceptional case. We're talking about what we call the captive customer syndrome. Politically, textile people are held in much higher regard than the garment people. Very often, they have a much better relationship with the governments and the organizations. In some countries that have well-developed textile industry, they are able to get the government to place restrictions on imports of textiles. And so the factory must either buy local textiles or do without. The result is that this industry can charge more and deliver less. We call this the captive customer syndrome. In many countries, and this is not just in developing countries, this is in the United States, for example. In many countries, mills produce only gray goods. They're leaving the factory to supervise and pay for the cost of all successive processes. So they give it that you have to pay for the gray goods. You have to cover the cost of moving the gray goods from the factory, from the mill to the dyer printer, the cost of dyeing, printing, and finishing, and the cost of transportation from the finisher to the garment factory. All of this raises prices. However, this is not the main problem. The main problem is the risk. If you buy fabric from a mill and it's, quote, what we call ready for the needle, dyed, printed, finished, that's it. If there's a damage, such as we discussed this, width to width shading, pilling, barré shading, irregular shrinkage, you can return the fabric. They delivered defective fabric. However, if you buy the gray goods and pay for the gray goods, and the dyer screws up, you're stuck. And this happens over and over again. It adds to the risk. What is the factory to do when the goods are given out to dye and they discover damages resulting either from the dye or damages that, such as barré shading, that they could not tell at the outset? Well, the mill doesn't care. They paid for the fabric. What is the factory going to do? Even if they wanted to replace the fabric and take the loss, they'll be late on delivery. So should the factory produce the goods and risk cancellation for late delivery, or should the factory produce the goods and ship damaged goods? You have countries which have great garment industry, which are being harmed because of the captive customer syndrome. Finally, the world's most difficult material sourcing problem. Cashmere is just a horrible product for the people who have to do it. You have to really know about cashmere. It's like silk fiber. And a lot of it, you have to know what part of the animal does the fiber come from. There is a tremendous amount of adulteration, and the only way you're going to tell whether the fiber is adulterated is by DNA testing. And much of it depends not just on the fiber, but what you do with it. If you want to do this yourself and do it well, okay, fly to Mongolia. Go to the fiber auctions. The only way to ensure the quality. Then they have to transport the fiber to yarn spinning, perhaps in Italy where they have great cashmere spinning. Transport it back again to China. You pay the duty, the tax. They have some really good mills in China producing really fine cashmere fabric. Then you have the transportation. This is what you have to go through. If you're buying cashmere fabric, go directly to the factory producing it. Usually these are vertically integrated. They're in Mongolia. They're carrying out the entire process. The reliable ones are very, very good. Okay, we can ready to start talking about trim. There are only
Okay, David, can I just interrupt you? Because I want to give the audience a chance now to ask them the questions because we are finishing with fabrics.
Okay, yeah, I think so.
I'm not sure if there's anybody who would like to ask a question of fabrics. There was one question about why do we bother so much about fabrics if we have software that calculates for me the best markers?
We want to know about the quality of the fabric. We want to know the marker is just one small aspect of the fabric cost. You know, they were pattern, their marker people before you had computers did a good job. This is a comprehensive problem. We have to look at all aspects. And yes, you can count on the marker to measure consumption, at least for the for the computer, but that's only one part.
So what are the other parts?
Everything else we're talking about the fabric. Where do you buy the fabric? Where you know, how do you deal with the fiber? You know, how do you you know? It's a whole list of things before we understand what the cost of the fabric is. It's not just simply 2 meters times $3. We've just gone through, I don't know, 19 slides telling you how you get the consumption, how you get the price. The marker is only one point.
Okay. Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to pose a question? And please raise your hand now. Otherwise, we move to trims and accessories. Okay, David, go ahead.
Okay. Trim, we only have in our cost sheet 2 areas where we talk about material. The fabric, which is the top goods, the outer goods, and the trim. All the material, all the proceeds of that material that are not top goods is trim. It includes the basic stuff that we know about, the thread, the zippers, the fibers, the lining, the interlining. Below, I have a list of the basic trim costs, but it also includes things like embroidery. If you're producing jeans or polo shirts, embroidery plays an important role with the badges. You have computerized embroidery machines. So how do you look at embroidery? It can be a trim, it can be direct labor, it could be both. It has to be a trim because you have to have the embroidery thread. Buying the thread is part of the trim process. However, it depends on where you do the embroidery. If your factory comes equipped with Tajima or other small computerized embroidery machines, then it becomes part of direct labor. But if you give it out, if you give out the panel piece to be embroidered elsewhere, we include this as trim. Okay, we have a trim sheet, and this is a very important tool. This is the beginning of the trim sheet. I want you to look at this. The first 5 items relate to the style itself. Just the details. The date of the trim sheet, the style number that the customer gave you, your manufacturing order number, a description, and the customer. And usually you have a sketch or a photo. The next group, A to M, is important. This is the information you want to know about every single trim item. Some of it you can know from the very beginning and should know when you quote the price. The item is lining. Who supplied the lining? So it's not just the name. We use, we use numbers for this. The quality number, the description of the lining. What is the unit What is the price? All of these things are provided before you actually quote a price. Once you have the order, then you issue a PO, production order, and you tell requirement in-house and total. In many cases, you have stock of trim items, particularly in thread. Certainly if it's white thread or black thread, but even in special colors, you will see that you will be reordering the same color that you have in stock. So you want to know how much thread you need, how much you have in house, and how much you have to order. That you do when you receive the purchase. That's when you receive the order from the customer. Now, when the goods finally arrives, how many days did you estimate before you get delivery? Some items could be 2 days, some could be a month, depending on what you're talking about. How much should you receive? And how many days did it take? You need this information going forward for the job costing, which Matthias talked about before. The actual items, and this is just a limited list. Different types of thread, different types of buttons, the snaps, the hooks and eyes, the zippers, the elastic, the shoulder pads, the tapes that are used in, say, polo shirts under the arms, shoulder pads, the main label, content label, care label, hang tag. Then you have the packing materials, the tissues, the polybag, the carton, other. There are, depending, you can run it, they can run certainly as many as 25 or 30 trim items. Or if it's a t-shirt, you're running 4 items, 5 items. This is a basic tool that you need. This is one area where I suggest that you do this by computer. There are a variety of reasons. First of all, there's tremendous time savings. You do this by hand. And it's accurate, and you can do it quickly and correctly. You avoid unrecognized errors. In small factories, from time to time, the trim person orders the wrong product. The garment required a 7-inch zipper, he orders a 6-inch zipper. What happens? Well, the 7-inch zipper goes into a drawer somewhere, and the 6-inch he reorders the 6-inch zipper. Who knows the difference? You know, in the computerized versions, you can't order the zipper twice. You can only order the zipper against the trim sheet. And finally, this is a clue as to the scheduling and the problems. We talked about the zipper problem that arrived late. Management recognizes this on day 1. There's a difference between notifying the buying office in Hong Kong when you're running 30 days late for the zipper, rather than when you're running 3 or 6 days late for the zipper. This system will allow you to have information on a timely basis. Okay, do we have any questions? Any questions? Mariana? Okay.
There's some
No,
in
not
Russian.
yet.
Try to translate them.
Yes, just a second.
Sure.
But there was one question again with fabrics. So we're back to fabrics, but I'm not really understanding it. It's fabric consumption versus marker consumptions.
But you have, yes, the marker yardage is only one part. You have the shrinkage, you have the wastage, you have the damage. These are the other parts. And by the way, you'll see based on the fiber, damage on silk from China can run 15%. From Italy, you're not going to have that, but you have to pay Italian prices.
Okay, go ahead, David, until
Okay.
we try to translate.
We finally finished the material. We're now at the CM. Labor, overhead, and profit. Start at the beginning. We know from the past the aggregate information. We know how much the labor costs were for each department for any period. You know what you paid the sewers last month or 2 months ago. You know your total overhead for any period, you know, because it's listed in the books that way. And you certainly know your total net profit. All this information is available in your factory. The problem is to take that bulk information and to break it down first by order and then by piece. This is really where the industry falls apart. Okay, we're going to talk about labor. When we talk about labor, we're talking about the cutters, the bundlers, the sewers, the inspectors, the pressers, the packers, anybody who has physically handled the garment is called a worker and is paid wages. We use that for labor. So it does not include the supervisors who are not part of labor or part of overhead. We want to calculate the cost of labor for each garment. Okay, when we start off with the sewing department because that's the easiest and most efficient way of getting the answers. We have something you have to bear in mind. In a factory, the sewing is done in a line, you call an assembly. Okay, it can be 20 machines, 40 machines, 80 machines. The line, by its very nature, can only produce one order at a time, only one style at a time. There are reasons for this, and we're going into this in some detail. Bear with me. So, if you know, you have to know for a past order, the number of machines in the line, the number of working days, factoring in overtime, and the number of pieces in the order. So that, for example, style XYZ will take 38.4 sewing minutes per piece. This is really important. For one thing, the factory needs this information to calculate future order costs. And they need this information to calculate change in productivity. And they need this information to calculate their schedules. This labor cost calculation is an unbelievably important factor. You take something, you take an order, it's 10,000 pieces, and it took you 20 days to produce the order. Okay? And you worked 8 hours a day, and the 60 minutes an hour, 40 minutes, 40 machines in the line, the 10,000 pieces each one took 38.4 minutes. Okay, that's the basic information. You want to go further? And you want to know what was the cost per unit. Well, you're paying the worker $150 a month. There are 26 days in the month. There are 8 hours a day and 60 minutes in the hour. And therefore, 38.4 minutes is 41 cents. That is the cost of labor. The information is there in the factory. Okay, but there are other factors. The most important of which is downtime because of line balancing. Line balancing is very important because the operation is carried out. There might be 20 different steps in the operation. if you want a smooth operation, you don't want bottlenecks, and you don't want to have part of the factory overloaded, part of the factory, without enough work, then you have to ensure that there's a sufficient number of workers for each operation to keep this thing operating smoothly. For example, operation A requires 2 minutes. Operation B requires 30 seconds. Well, you know that somewhere along the way, it takes 4 times as long to do A as it does B, and you have to allow for this. Because the line has to be rebalanced for every style, you can only have one style in the line at a time. So at a certain point, the style has to come to an end, you rebalance. Well, how much time does it take to balance the line? Half a day. So 20 days becomes 20 and a half days. 38.4 becomes 39.36. We're talking about maybe 2.5% increase in production, in the number of minutes per piece. The important thing here is twofold. First of all, the line can only produce one style at a time. You have to stop to rebalance. And the second thing is that the amount of time lost to rebalancing has nothing to do with the size of the order. This is something which we started in the cutting department. The size of the order is crucial here, because if you have 10,000 pieces and 20 days of production, the difference is 2.5%. But imagine you only have 1,500 pieces. Instead of 20 days production, you have 3 days production to get to 38.4. But now it's 3.5 days. And so suddenly that half a day has increased your production time from 38.4 to 44.8. An increase of 16.7%. Because the time for line balancing remains the same regardless of the size of the order. Using this leads to a whole range of problems. First of all, introducing a new style does not mean that the line automatically has 40 machines working. You have to start at the back of the line and feed the bundles into the line, where his work begins in step 1 and then goes to step 2, step 3, until all 40 machines are operating. There's a learning curve, and there is a learning curve for the introduction of any new style. Whether you're talking about fancy dresses, which shows tremendous changes, or you're talking about men's shirts, which shows fewer changes, there is a learning curve. It takes time for the worker to achieve real efficiency of motion. Again, I point out the size of the order is not a factor in determining introducing new styles or the learning curve. Although one thing has become clear, and this is really important, is that if you're producing 1,500 pieces, you can't use a 40 machine line. Not only, by the way, are the costs prohibitive, but reality is that you can't balance the line any longer. Why? Because once you get below a certain quantity, you no longer can have 2 workers for 1 worker for. In the end, you're dealing with fractions of workers. You can't deal with a fraction of workers. Line balancing. 100 years ago, line balancing simply meant adding numbers of sewers to difficult operations. Step A required 4 sewers. Step B required a single sewer. This required no ability to determine the time required for each operation. It worked out in 1919, when we're looking at Henry Ford's great dictum, all I want is the hands. I don't care about the worker, I want the hands. Because the idea was to turn workers into automatons. Today factories don't think it was. And it's interesting that the industry that brought us, this business about mass production and all I want is the hands, is the same industry that brought us lean manufacturing, where the basis is that I want the whole worker, and success is based on worker empowerment. Today, the factory no longer really should be interested in the number of bodies. The supervisor, the factory has to understand you're dealing with people. Once you realize you're dealing with people, you can understand that some people have better abilities than other people. In a factory, generally speaking, you have A class, B class, and C class workers. A C class worker is not so good. B class worker is your average person. The A class worker is a superstar. I can't tell you just how talented some sewers are. I was running a jacket factory, and it was piecework. And I used to spend a lot of time looking at the payrolls. And there was a guy, one worker, who was sewing 6 jackets a day. You know, you're talking about the guys, it is like this taking an hour and a half to sew a jacket. It was one person sewing 1 jacket. Just wasn't it a line? I couldn't believe this. And I knew he was cheating. I didn't know how he was cheating, but I knew. I was a young man. I didn't know how he was cheating me, but I know he was cheating me. And so I decided that one day I would come and stand by that machine quietly, you know, off to the side somewhere, all day and watch him. So the day came and I stood there. No, the day came and I couldn't get there because I had important meetings, and I didn't show up until 4 o'clock. And the guy was gone. I knew I'd been cheated. I called a little supervisor and I said, this guy, what happened? He said he completed his 6 jackets and went home. The guy is just superstar. There are people like that. The best supervisor, best line supervisor knows his people. So rather than put 4 people on A, he'll put 2 Class A sewers on A. The line is balanced, is more efficient. Furthermore, there are great line supervisors who will spend time training the sewers. And these are the people in a factory you want to watch, because these are the people in the factory that you want to promote. In the end, management starts taking an honest role in this thing, and they start bringing in specialists, engineers, to start training workers. All of this work based on worker empowerment. Okay, there is a limit, as I said. The limit is at a certain point, you can't have half a worker. However, today you do. In the highest quality factories, you don't really have a line anymore. In the highest quality factories, you have teams of multitasked sewers. It's pretty simple. It's like a factory within a factory. And the team is paid like you would pay a subcontractor. They're paid for the job. The team basically forms itself, to tell you the truth. You have a person, they say, I want to run a team, you set them up, machines, give them an order. The beautiful thing about it is you don't care about productivity anymore. They worry about productivity. You care about quality. The result is overwhelming. Because, you know, the truth is people who are sewers, men, women who are sewers, they're not stupid, they're uneducated. and they know a lot about sowing. You put people in a position where they can benefit from greater productivity, you'll be surprised how great that productivity is. And the quality becomes impeccable. Okay, here's the problem. The problem that you have here is that we know the cost of sewing. We can break it down to 38.4 minutes and whatever, and we know that's the cost of sewing. But what about the cutters, the bundlers, the inspectors, the pressers, the packers? We can't use that same information because it's continuous work. There is a way of doing it which sort of fudges it, but works every time. We go back to our account department. We know the actual total payroll for sewing for a specific period. We know the actual payroll for everybody else. So if the wages for the sewers for the period totaled $1,000, the total wages $1,000, which the sewers received 667, they received 2/3 of the wages. So for all practical purposes, we can say if the sewer is paid $1, the rest of the people are paid 50 cents. And that's how you calculate it. The cost of sewing per unit plus 50% for everything else. Are there any questions? We're looking at this differently than we did in the past. We're looking at this to try and find out the actual answers in the way we run the factory. This is really important. I'm surprised that more people aren't asking. Okay. We look at this from the customer side. We talk about open sourcing before. Open sourcing is a technique that was put together some years ago by customers. It works this way. The customer knows everything the factory knows. They know the cost of the material, they know the consumption, they know the cost of the trim. They designated the trim suppliers. They know the labor, they know everything. All that matters is the CM. They know the fabric, they know the trim. So if they know that all that matters is the CM, the customer doesn't have to negotiate with the factory on the FO price of the order. They have to negotiate on the number of minutes the factory requires to produce the goods and what they will pay. And so this came to open sourcing, and the question was, you know something, I'm the customer, I'm going to pay you 6 cents for every order. Theoretically, it worked out well, except for a problem, and that is when you start looking at the customer's figures, they realize that some factories are being paid 6 cents, and other factories are paying maybe 12, maybe 18 cents for the same product. And there's a reason for this. Basically, it's covered in the other things. And that is that there's more to the factory than simply cutting and producing garments. If all you can do is offer the customer cheap labor and low CM, then they'll beat you up. But if you can provide services, the services have value, and the customer will pay for value. The customer can use this data. Well, the customer can use what we're talking about, in a different manner. How many people remember Rana Plaza great disaster in Bangladesh where the building collapsed. And people started asking customers questions. How could you give out an order to a factory, which is such a terrible place? And the customers came up with an answer. They said, we didn't know it was going there. We did not subcontract to that factory. The factory did. Not our responsibility. They said, how could you not know? And the answer was very simple. The order was 500,000 pieces. How do we know? You want us to count? You want us to count for 500,000 pieces? You allow 5 seconds for each garment, 8 hours a day. It would take 87 days. The truth is the customer didn't have to count to 500,000. Counting to 20 worked out well. If you have 20 lines, each of 80 machines require 25 days to complete the 500,000 pieces. The minute the QC, the quality control guy from the customer came in, he needed only count the number of lines. If only 10 lines were engaged in sewing the cell, he knows that half the lines were being subcontracted. Okay, making progress. Overhead. Overhead is everything in CM but labor and profit. This is a partial list of overheads. Accountants, advertising, consumable stores, cleaning fluid, oil, that's a contingent liability. You have liabilities which might occur. You ship the garment late. Maybe you're going to put in a claim. You have to account for this possibility. Courier, depreciation, donations, electricity and water, entertainment. There's a list. Just goes on and on and on. It's 41 items. That is the total overhead. The factory knows the total overhead to the penny. You can determine the overhead per unit. You can determine the total overhead for any period of time. How do we break down overhead into a per unit cost? This is the real problem. And there is a simple way to do it. And that is to understand the relationship between overhead and labor. We know the total labor. And we know the total overhead. And that they're both related to the same factor. And that is time. The factory that produces 100 garments in a month has twice the productivity as a factory producing 50 garments a month. At the same time, the factory producing 100 garments a month are paying more to the workers than the ones producing 50 garments a month. There is a relationship between overhead and labor, and we can use as a rule of thumb. We just calculate the relationship, the ratio, and the accountants can give you this. This overhead is one of the most important factors determining product cost. But more importantly, it's an important method of valuing what's happening in the factory. Overhead differs from in developed countries to developing and least developed countries. In developed countries, an increase in productivity of 3% is tremendous because they already have the education. They've already gone through the steps. They have the technology. So that in the developed country, this is used, it's a very small figure, but This is a very small figure, and it's used to reduce labor costs. Because in developed countries, the labor cost is the single most important cost factor outside of factory. In an underdeveloped country, where you have very cheap labor, maybe 5% of the labor of the wages paid in developed country, the cost of labor is less important. At the same time, the overhead is not as low as you would think. It costs more money to turn on the electricity in Mumbai than in Minneapolis or Manchester. And so the ratio between overhead and labor in the developed country could be overhead is 70% of labor. And in developing country, it can be anywhere between 250 and 600%. And this is really important. This is really important because if you can increase productivity, not just that you'll save labor, but you will save money on the overhead where the real costs are. Mariana, do we have a question? Mariana?
David, we have questions which are not necessarily on overheads, but more generic or more globally. So maybe we ask this at the end.
Okay, no problem. Please interrupt if you want to. Okay. This is really one of the great myths. We're talking about profit. A factory, garment factory, that nets 5%, that's really net 5%, money in the bank, is doing really well. Now, there are many people who I'm talking to today say that's nonsense. I'm doing 10%, I'm doing 15%. I gotta tell you, if you are really looking at this thing in a strict, rigorous form, I gotta tell you, 5% is pretty good. For example, how do you value your inventory? If you're in the steel industry, you have a value on iron ore, you have a value on fossil fuel. These fungible products, it's worth something. If you're in the automobile business, you have a value on your factory, machinery and equipment. If you're in the garment industry, what is the value of your inventory? If it is not against an order, it's virtually worthless. What is the cost? What is the value of your machinery? These are sewing machines. It's not like you would find in a specialized industry, a hard goods industry, where these computerized equipment is very expensive. The minute you buy the sewing machine, the value goes down by 50%. Okay. This is just repeating what I said. Okay. Provided you have a detailed calculation, that problem is pretty good. Okay. Take an example. You have a 200 machine factory producing quality men's woven cotton shirts with the same quality provided by your Malaysia-based competitor. In 2019, the average FOB price for a Malaysia shirt was $11.29. Okay. Your profit would be 56 cents. If you're producing goods in a cheaper country, the cost of a shirt can be $5. But if you're in the Malaysia business, if you're in Malaysia, you're making 56 cents. What is a 200 machine factory producing quality men's cotton shirts get you the course of a year. 200 machines, 29.3 cents per 29.3 cents per minute. Sorry, 29.3 minutes per piece. Operating 80% capacity gives you 816,000 shirts a year. Total sales, $9 million. Your profit is $461,000 a year. How much did the factory cost you? Let's say the factory cost you $1 million. Well, if it cost you $1 million, you just made 46% profit return on your investment, which I got to tell you, outside of the drug industry, both legal and illegal, you're in the high income bracket. Okay, this is what makes our industry successful. If you operate a decent factory, you make money. It's not on your volume, but it is decent money on the investment. Okay, the basic costings are best in estimate. I want to get to conclusions here. The factory, it's able to give you some estimate of the factory, the trim and the fabric requirements. It gives you an opportunity to order fabric and trim by computer. At the same time, it has disadvantages. At the beginning of the process, they tend to under order fabric because they do not want to get stuck. The factory cannot calculate the actual cost and profit until the production is complete. And this is where job costing comes in. The job costing is based on the reality. If you shipped 10,000 pieces at $10, if you produced if you produced 1,000 pieces, the fabric costs you $60,000. The trim $10,000. The CM $30,000. The total FOB price was $100,000. The total cost, the total revenue was $100,000 based on a cost of $95,000. You made 5%, but the reality is different. This is the key factor. Reality is different. In the end, you got stuck with fabric. There was fabric that you didn't use up, and the value of that fabric went down. It went to nothing, and that means that you have to include the value of that fabric, that inventory, in the cost of the garment. The trim, in this case, you save some money because you have trim in the house. The labor will save some money, but the overhead was greater than you believed. The total cost here was $99,000. Revenue was little than $99,000. The revenue was $99,300. That was $52,522. Instead of making $5,000, you made $522. The data was always there. You always had a chance. You always had a chance to understand what's going on. The job costing is a vital tool to see how you're doing, but it is also a vital tool to understand how you are making money relative to your customers. You have 6 customers, and that was the net profit you made from each customer. And it tells you, I want to work with Baker guy, where I made 12%, and I don't want to work with Delta guy, where for some reason I lost 3%. The job costing gives you the basic data you need for this. It also tells you what product you should be in. you're in the fine gauge cut and sew knit business. You're making t-shirts, polo shirts, blouses, dresses, and you can see the place for you to be is in dresses and blouses. That's where the money is. And you can see this on a regular basis. This is what a job costing is about. The job costing is there to tell you what's happening and where you're supposed to be going. This is really in the end what the basic costing is about. It is to understand realities, understand where you're going, to understand how you have to get to become more efficient. Most importantly, it tells you the state of your company. Okay. Are there questions? Matthias?
There are a number of questions. I think we came to the end, no?
Yeah.
And so there are a couple of questions there's no hand raised, but there are a couple of questions which cover a little bit everything. I think important thing not to remember is that this was the webinar, but it, as I mentioned at the beginning, should have been the last one. Well, no, it's the third one. The last one should have been the first one, simply because we wanted to have the difficult discussions for some reasons in November. So normally the next one would have been a job costing, but we have done it already.
Yeah.
So, and it's important for the companies to understand that you need to have a calculation for your customer in order to get the order. And then you have to have another calculation to see what the actual costs have been. And this is then the job costing, which can give you vital information for your future business. That's what David explained. So let me look into the different question, which goes a little bit all over. There's one from anonymous one. He says the provision is taken if taken really for redundancy factor for labor intensive factory, the 5% margin must come after provision of redundancy. Will you agree with me on this point?
I missed the point.
No, I'm just reading it because I also
You know, so this is really if I understand the questions is really important. One of the belief is that we're going to increase productivity and profit by having greater technology replacing workers. I think that's the issue. We want to get rid of the workers. We want to get rid of the workers, and in getting rid of the workers will increase profit. You know, I'm sorry, the previous webinars discussed this at some length. That works well if you're located in Switzerland. It works well if you're located in the UK. It works well if you're paying a sewer 30,000 euro or 35,000 euro a year. You want to replace them with machinery. I can understand that. If you're paying a sewer $150 a month, you really think you're going to make any money? The real money, if you want to do something about increasing productivity, train the worker. Let the worker do more. If the worker does more, it's money in the bank. We cannot rely on technology, and we should not rely on technology to solve our problems.
Okay, I think there were some other questions from the same anonymous attendee, but reading through this, I think to understand that with the problem of COVID and with not all of the workers being on the payroll, but not all of the workers are actually working. So they have redundancy and they have to pay for them, and they have a social and also an environmental responsibility towards them. how to put this into the calculation, because there are workers working on the specific order, but there are others that are still on the payroll, SUAs, which cannot be laid out, which should not be laid off, but their costs need to be reflected somehow.
Well, you have two ways of doing it. You can increase the cost per the labor cost per unit, because if you have 100 people working, and now you have 50 people working, and you only and 50% 50 people are getting paid, then the labor cost has gone up. Or you can put the whole thing in overhead. You know, the fact is, this is really underlying this is the fact that our industry is in a state of disaster. You know, our industry has its own little pandemic going on, and you know, and people are throwing up their hands and I don't know what to do. And but you know, they're right. This is beyond people's control. I can say that this is a time for us to reconsider the industry and what we're doing when we're going forward. I can't find work for the workers, but I can give you ways that the industry, that the factory will survive and prosper in the future.
Okay, if any of you attendees would like to ask a live question or would you follow up on this question, please raise your hands and then we can give you the floor. Another question, couple of questions come in with regard to what we discussed at length, David, the two of us, is the standard minutes or say the time measurement techniques, because in your presentation you assume that a garment will take that much 40 minutes, as you said. But how do you actually come to this figure? And this is the question about time measurement techniques, because that's crucial in the end.
None of us know how much time the garment will take. Whether you're using standard applied minutes, whatever it is, we don't know. There are too many factors involved. We know what it took before. All of this information on time per minute and on minutes per unit is based on past experience. The idea is that if you have history with a product, you can use that past history to solve the problem. What I'm saying here, and this is really the area, is that the solution does not come from adding workers to more difficult products. It comes from taking better trained workers and having fewer workers. There are solutions to the problem that the people who created standard applied minutes 100 years ago never thought were possible. We've moved on. I know people like standard applied minutes, you know, but it is not an efficient way of working today.
But I think if I can ask now a question myself, building on this, you said at one stage that with the open account, your customer or the customer of the factory knows everything. And everything goes back to the CM costs. So the standard minutes that needs to be agreed between the customer and the factory.
Here's
so
the
now,
issue. This is
so now
really,
you need to come to agreement, and both sides need to be comfortable with this agreement.
Yeah,
so it needs to be a kind of technique.
This is really the most important thing we have to learn today. If your business is cutting and sewing garments and that's it, for all practical purposes, you're out of business. It has nothing to do with this. We are in a service industry today. If you can provide the services that the customer needs, they'll pay for it. Look, every one of us is a customer. You go into a pharmacy and you buy toothpaste, you're a customer. Do you really care what the Colgate people paid for the materials, the trim, manufacturing cost? They don't care. You don't care about that. You care about, does it have value? All the customer cares about, all the price is based on its value. And the more we try and keep this business going about reducing our labor costs as some sort of thing, or replacing labor with machinery, we should be doing this, we should be providing the services that the customer wants. And they'll pay for it. They are paying for it. Just as factories are suffering in many countries that only can provide cheap labor, their factories are moving ahead tremendously in places where they're providing services. That's the future of the industry.
There are, Mariana, there are a couple of hands raised. Do you want to try to give them the floor while I try to see what
Yes.
other questions coming in? They're coming many now, so
Yeah.
I have to.
So Joseph Sabri, I will allow you to talk. Please unmute yourself. Go ahead. Joseph?
Keep on doing so, and I will ask another question. There was a question about exchange rates and yes. How do you put this in the calculations? Because fabrics are often paid in dollars. Why are the customers paying euros? So how do you put this into the costing, the exchange rate and the risk of exchange rate changes?
This is an important issue. It's always been an important issue in our industry, because when you think about it, our costs, our expenses are in one currency, and we are paid in another currency. Okay, so there's no change in this. I'm not interested in those people who are using exchange rates as a form of gambling. But if you are in business, you want to fix the money that you will receive in terms of the money you're paying out. So particularly your labor. And so you buy forward. It's not that costly. And the amount, you're not buying billions of dollars. And, my experience, if you don't use up the entire contract, if you're an operating business, the bank automatically turns it over. You are not looking to make money, a profit off exchange rate. You're just looking not to lose money.
So I'm not sure did you answer the question?
Yeah, no, the bank will let you fix your exchange rate.
Sure, but if you have made a gain or a loss, how do you put this into the calculations?
You should avoid it by fixing exchange rates. If you have under your overhead, you have financial costs, and of course it goes into financial costs. It arises for that. But my God, we are not in the money business. We're in the shirt business. We just want to make sure that the money we get paid for the shirts is based on what we're paying out.
Yeah, but probably it's not that every small companies can do this. No, fixing exchange rates.
I don't know. I think if you're a company, if you're exporting garments, you've got to have a bank. You got to, you have to have a bank, and fixing exchange rate, I don't think is a major issue. You'd know better than I would. Buying a contract for $100,000 is not a major issue.
Well, this is to avoid the risk, but if you have been exposed to a risk, I think in the end you'll need to reflect this in the job costing, because if you made an additional loss, you have to put this to the order, so it needs to be reflected somewhere.
It goes in your overhead. There's no question about it. One of the problems you have is the need to have a category for everything, and you can't. You have to put things together in some sense, but they have to be accounted for. You just can't. You just can't forget about it. I would put it together in financial expenses.
Okay. There's one other question on overheads and cost per minute. Can depreciation of whatever, of furniture, machines, real estate even, be taken into account for the calculation of cost per minute?
No. It's this is overhead. The depreciation is separate. We have, you know, the building that you have, the land that you own, the building that you have I didn't depreciate it over a 40-year period, a 20-year period. The machinery, you're lucky to get away with 6 years. You have depreciation, furniture and fixtures. That's standard in overhead figures. It is not a factor of productivity. The amount of money that you're depreciating is fixed. Productivity simply says that the allocation of that money goes to more units so that the overhead per unit goes down, just as the overhead per unit for electricity goes down. This is just one more factor. By the way, one reason why people think they have 10% profits is because they don't figure depreciation.
Then there's one on, I'm just randomly asking because there are too many. Do we need to calculate a break-even point in terms of quantity to produce to complete the job costing calculations?
Okay, this is an important factor, and I brought it up elsewhere. There's a high season and a low season. Okay? And it is unfair to use the job costing to account for high season and low season. You want to know if you're making money on the side. You know, if there's no business, you're not making much money. And so the way to do that is to look at a break-even point. I'll break even at 70%, I'll break even at 60%, and calculate that, use that. Okay? So that what you're saying is that the money that is lost in the low season does not really affect the job costing. It affects you, but it doesn't affect the job costing. This is a very important factor. When you do your costings, you have to recognize that not only do you have to cover your overhead this month, but you have to cover your overhead altogether. Conversely, this is really important, I think. In low season, you're going to lose money. The question is, can you lose less money by reducing the cost? If your CM is $3, will you get some business at 2.5? There is a price where you get more business. And this is a calculation that job costings really help you, because you can see how much money you can give back to the customer and still do better. You know, you just shouldn't stay there like low season is sort of like a plague.
Okay, Mariana, there's still one hand raised. I don't know whether the person would like to speak. Otherwise, I'll ask another question.
I just allowed her to speak. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Алло.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Да, здравствуйте. I am from Dushanbe, Таджикистан. Да. Я бы хотела задать вопрос. Было очень много информации, спасибо большое. Что-то мы поняли, что-то, видимо, для нашей страны немножко непонятно. Мы не на том уровне немножечко в швейной программе, чтобы понять такую сложную информацию. Но меня все время мучает один вопрос. Мы являемся одной из стран, которые очень дешево шьют одежду. То есть у нас очень низкая оплата за рабочую силу. Но мы все равно не можем создать конкуренцию другим республикам, республикам, например, Китаю, у нас одна и та же ткань, мы правильно рассчитываем стоимость изделия, включаем туда амортизацию, налоги, все. И у нас получается на 50% дороже, чем у китайцев. С чем это связано? Где нужно еще срезать, чтобы изделие было конкурентоспособное? В будущем, я надеюсь, Таджикистан составит хорошую конкуренцию, и у нас будут знаменитые бренды шить одежду на наших фабриках. Но сегодня нам сложно немного поднять производство, так как у нас себестоимость изделия выше получается, чем у китайцев. Стоит ли нам настолько прям снизить цену, чтобы, как делают другие страны иногда, для того, чтобы организовать и найти клиентов в другой стране, они продают ниже себестоимости? Помогите, что нужно сделать, чтобы создать конкуренцию другим странам, которые тоже изделия продают на 50% ниже? Спасибо большое.
Hold it. I had two conversations going on here. Can somebody repeat in English the question? Just in English. Hello? Yes. What was the question? Mm-hmm.
Меня не слышно было или как? Алло. Могут перевести то, что я сказала, или нет?
Yes, yes, we heard. Just a second. We are translating.
Да, что скажут?
Every country, starting out in the garment industry and the global garment industry, has faced the same problem. It is not a question of necessarily paying less for the material or things of the sort. It is more a question of finding a niche in the market for you. And to do that, we have to understand, what do you have to offer? What is the state of your industry? What are the type of factors you have? And to do that, you have to have have somebody come in and actually give you a strategy to move forward. This is basically something like a 6-month job for them to give you an answer and probably a year to implement it. But in the end, you cannot simply compete with China. China won't compete with China. You have to set up something of your own that has value. There is no fast answer here. I've been doing this all my life. And, every country is different. Every country has different problems. Every country has more to offer. You have to figure out how to do it. Matthias, you're in the same business that I am. Do you have a fast answer?
No, there is no fast answer. I mean, it's what I think what you said. It's not only about producing or sewing a garment together. It's about the services around the full package that you offer your client. Starting with helping them in forecasting trends or helping them to replenish quickly their warehouses or even their shops. So it's the whole value chain and the services that go around the value chain, which in the end, especially now, makes a difference for buyers to go to one destination or not to the other.
As of 2016, we did a study. I've worked in 36 countries in my career, no two of which are the same. You have to find out the country. What do you have? And you can't do that from the inside, because you have to understand not only what the country has to offer, but how does it relate to the world at large? And how can you put together a group effort to make it a success? That's what it's about. I'm sorry, there is no quick answer here.
Okay, then I think we also have to look at the time now, and also our interpreters normally should not work then more than 2 hours without a break. But maybe we just take another 2 or 3 minutes. There are more questions. We send you the questions, David, and maybe you can answer them then in writing.
I think
there are 1 or 2. One is, for example, how cost of granting deferred payments that many buyers are asking now. We pay you later than we initially agreed upon, can be calculated.
This is really important. This is one of the key factors that factories offer. This predates the virus and everything, especially in Europe. The customer wants to do business with the factory's money. They want open account, there's no LCs, and they want 60 to 90 days. That's the rule. The question is, in today's market, who are you going to give 60 to 90 days credit for? I mean, this is an issue. I don't know. One of the things that governments might think of that would be helpful is to have export credit insurance. You might want
Okay. This is the overall systemic solution in terms of costing. How do you do this? Is it overhead?
It's a service. It has to, because it goes into, and I never thought about it this way, but it has to go into, I guess it has to go into financial costs, but it's a separate item. It's in financial costs, but it is a separate item. And by the way, there are contingent liabilities. Even if you're insured, you're only going to get 80% of the money.
Yeah, but we assume you get the money, but you have to pay for the interest. So that needs to be in the job costing for the key accounts by customer.
Well, there is what's called old line factoring, where banks will not pay you the money, but they'll guarantee the payment. I think it runs like 2%.
Maybe I'll just ask one last question, and then we'll close it, and then we'll send. We sent all the questions to David. He will answer them, and then we'll post them on our website so that you can get the answers, the answers to your questions. The last one is really about costing again. How does a factory owner incorporate the cost of inspecting 100% of the fabric provided by the client to ensure that the level, in case there's a level of damage?
That's fabric costs. That comes in the cost of the fabric.
So this goes then. So it increases it's fabric cost, but who covers this? It's covered by the client then, no?
No, the same way is, for example, there are specific rules in the EU about chemicals, toxic chemicals, dye stuff, and the customer will insist, actually the governments will insist, that you have a certificate from a recognized organization that has inspected the fabric for these things. Customers are paying for that, but they will ask for the certificate.
Sure, but I understand the question is, okay, your customer says, this is the nominated fabric mill and the fabric costs that much. You make the inspection and see, lots of damages here. And you have to inspect this again.
Yes.
So who takes the cost of this inspection?
Okay, no, this is a different, I'm sorry. Where the customer has designated the mill and the price, you go back to the customer. he's told you where to work and what to pay. If it's costing more, you go back to the customer. And by the way, if it really is serious, if there's serious problems, you have to notify the customer to reject the fabric, and has to reimburse you for all costs. One of the problems you have in the industry is it's okay to talk about this, but the question is, will the customer actually live up to the agreement? And this is based on the quality of your customer. It's one thing to talk about what should be, and there's another thing to talk about what is. If you have a factory and you're an important factory to somebody, then these problems disappear. Maybe you want to say, I'm inspecting 10%. You go to the customer and you say that at the beginning, I'm inspecting 10%, and that's my cost. I'll include that. I'll include the cost of the fabric. But beyond that, then I will notify you and either take the fabric back, or or we have to do something about it. For example, I know with silk, we have different barrier shading and things. So if it's expensive fabric, you would cut away the damages and cut what you could. And if you could cut 40% of the fabric, you did that. And the customer knew that, and the customer covered you, because that's the nature of the product.
Okay, Mariana, last chance for someone to ask live questions, because there's still hands raised, and then we close.
Yes, okay. So Joseph, I will open for you. Please unmute yourself and go ahead. Joseph, unmute yourself, please. You're allowed to talk. Well, we'll go to the next one. So, Klaskov, you're allowed to speak. Please unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. My name is Safa. I want to thank you, first of all. Thank you for this valuable webinar. Thank you, Mr. David, for sharing your expertise. My question is related to the cost of product development. From my experience, and like as an example, we were not used to do any kind of product development, but we started doing it lately with one of our customers that we've been working with for more than 7 years. We usually receive the technical folder with the technical design and sketch, also the form of measurements and the digital pattern. But now we have to do it all by ourselves, and we provide everything for the customers. We still don't know how to calculate the cost of this new service that we are providing and this product development that we're providing. On the other hand, we can also not convince our customer that there's a service that we are providing and we need to pay for it. So there are two questions here, and thank you so much.
Okay, this was covered in some detail previously. This is very important, because that's how the industry is moving. The factory should take over product development. And it's not just the customer stops giving you the spec sheet and the tech sheet and just says, take care of it. There has to be a methodology created. So that, for example, you have to have a direct relationship with the buyer, with the designer. And then you go through the process of what you have to do to satisfy the designer. Not just, by the way, not just in terms of the quality, not just in terms of design integrity, that is, that the sample looked like the sketch and the stock looked like the sample, but also it has to move into areas such as target price. Is the garment that you come up with, does it meet the customer's target price? The problem we have today is that this information is beyond you. And it's beyond everybody except the very large companies. People, there has to be a form of education. This is something, it's a project that I'm working on. But what I'm saying is that when the customer says, we want you to do the product development, you have to have a plan in mind on day one. Okay, we'll do the product development and this is how we'll do it. And these are the costs. And by the way, the costs are, there are two parts. One is the added cost that you have, and the second is an added profit. They're not going to find people who are going to be able to do this without new skill sets, without the ability, the background of doing the services. The smart customers who are doing this are going into the factories and teaching the factory to do it and paying for it. This is, I shouldn't say it. Send me an email. Okay, I'll give you some ideas on this, because this is something which I think is in the nature of the industry. Where are you from? Hello? Hello?
Yes, we are here, David.
Then where is the questioner from? Where's the factory located?
Hello, Mr. David. I'm from Morocco. We are located in Morocco.
You know something? I think, and I just say this, I think Morocco is one of the world's undervalued industries. Actually, Morocco, a factory in Morocco should be able to do product development. You're in your own right, your country is a fashion center, especially, and send me an email.
I will.
Okay?
I will. Thank you so much. I will.
This is a fundamental problem. Next.
We have only one question left over, but just as a compliment, yes, we discussed this in the earlier webinars, and it's part of the guide that will coming out soon in the second part of the guide. So we'll also have something in writing. I don't know whether the man or lady from Russia, from a Russian-speaking country, Tajikistan or Kyrgyzstan, is raised their hand. Would still like to talk?
Yes, you're allowed to talk. Please unmute yourself. Yes, go ahead.
Здравствуйте. Слышно меня? Хорошо. Это из Республики Таджикистан. Мы вас приветствуем, благодарим за такую конференцию. У нас вопрос такой. Вот мы, швейная фабрика у нас, мы производим и экспортируем в страны Европы и в Россию также. В среднем наша цена продукции швейных изделий, это брюки и шорты, составляет от 5 до 12 долларов. Но при продаже на европейских рынках или стране России конкретно, цена розничной продажи составляет 40-50 долларов, например. Это относительно составляет от 4 до 6 раз превышает стоимость продажи, оптовые продажи относительно розничной. Это так ли есть на мировой практике? Как вот нам сказали, это же разница 4-5 раз. Это нормальная ли ситуация на мировом рынке? Так ли это? А также есть другой вопрос. Вот сейчас в связи с пандемией рынок очень насыщенный товар, производство запасов. Мы как узнали по статьям, рынок очень насыщенный. То есть в складах очень много товаров, но стоимость сырья, а конкретно говоря, вот, например, хлопковолокна по индексу Ливерпуля, как мы заметили, очень в последнее время поднимается. Стоимость сырья других там синтетических нитей, там полиэстер, спандекс и так далее, тоже также увеличивается постепенно. Производители не знают, что будет дальше. Там. Мы вот получаем очень малые заказы и не знаем, будет ли дальше, будут заказы, будут ли поступать к нам. К чему это может привести? Как вы думаете, это временное явление? Или же вот турки закупают хлопок по мировым ценам? Не знаю. Но готовая продукция, цена не повышается на нем. Вот в швейных изделиях имеется в виду. Брюки, шорты, куртки и так далее. Хлопчатобумажные. Спасибо.
Can somebody repeat the question, please?
David, you have not been changing the channel. Should have changed to English channel. Then you would have turned. You would have listened to the translation.
I have. Excuse me, Matthias. I have the English translation on, but I'm hearing English and Russian simultaneously.
Ah.
Да, ты что выдал? Не может быть такого. Киргизстан, Таджикистан,
I think so. There are two problems here. Many countries who are starting off are in the mass commodity garment business. They're doing basic clothing, doing T-shirts, they're doing underwear, they're doing jeans or casual cotton pants, and there are more factories there than customers, and it's hard to break into that market. And the problem is that it's one thing to begin as a first stage factory in commodities, but to survive in today's market, you have to get out of that. You have to start trading up. But trading up is a different factory than you have now. Also, it goes back to what Matthias and I were talking about before. You need services. Look, there are people who are able to quote ridiculously low prices, and you can't compete with us. And the fact that somebody is selling the same product, supposedly, 10 times, 20 times, you can buy a pair of jeans for $10, and you can buy a pair of jeans for $300, and they're both made out of denim, although I think one is ring spun. It's a matter of what you are doing. It's a matter of the factory. The fact that they're both denim jeans is not an answer. One is a designer product and is made like a designer product, and the other one is a basic commodity. You have to decide that to survive, you have to do two things. You have to trade up and you have to provide services. Otherwise, there is no future.
I think then there was the question also about they have a lot of stocks, including fiber, cotton, but also some yarns for which the prices go up right now, while the prices of the final garments go down. So they're a little sandwiched. Also, if they have to buy new yarns and fibers, for example.
You're talking about fungible products, and the prices go up, they don't go down. You have to be able to be in the business where you can afford to buy the stuff. This happens to the industry every so often. The people who don't trade up, the people who don't deliver something that the customer will pay for, get wiped out. This is, I hate to say this, but we have our own pandemic in the industry. The future, and this is just my opinion, the future industry is going to be a lot smaller than the industry is now, or the industry was before the crisis. You'll have too many factories chasing too few customers, chasing too few consumers. Only the people who are equipped for this are going to survive. This is the time now, when there is no industry, for you to plan your future. The future cannot be the same as the past. I'm sorry. You know, the gentleman is simply raising the points that should be obvious to everybody. I can't survive in this market. It's not about the virus. I just can't survive in the market. And that's been going on for some time.
Okay, David, I think that brings us to the end. So I would like to thank everybody who participated as attendees and still with us. I would like to thank David, of course, who made an exhaustive presentation. And also, of course, the other presentations and the book, which hopefully comes out very soon. I would like to thank the interpreters. We are running over time of half an hour, so sorry for this. And thank you very much for your valuable services vis-a-vis the different languages and different stakeholders we have in the different countries. I would like to thank my colleagues, of course, for setting this up and being in the background, making sure that everything runs smoothly. As I said, this presentation will be uploaded, the recording will be uploaded, your questions will be transferred to David and he will give us an answer in writing, and we also upload these. The overall guide, as I mentioned at the beginning, will be hopefully ready in spring. So we, looking outside, we already have spring, but not per calendar yet, only the weather. And then it will initially be available in English, but then we'll also translate it into the other languages. We had a couple of comments said that was too basic. We had a couple of comments saying that it was a little bit too complicated, or maybe too many things left out that had been covered already before. But be assured that within the guide, we put everything together, and it should be a useful tool for companies that need to start with the basics, but also for companies that already have everything in place but would go the next step. We'll keep you posted on the development of it. And as David has gracefully said to one of the participants, if you have some additional important questions, he was always open. David, I think, sorry if I say this, but I think you are. If there are questions, send it to ITC if you want. We pass it on, or send it directly to David. David is also on LinkedIn, so if you would like to join him on LinkedIn, I think you can also do so.
Let me say, it is, in today's world, there are so few places where you can go to get honest information. People who don't have an axe to grind, and people who simply want to tell you, give you answers that you need. It is a privilege that Matthias has asked me to do this work. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks, David, for this. Thank you, everybody. And I wish you all a nice rest of the day and success in your business. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.